Good morning, Hayes Hills folks and guest. Pastor David with you on our study through the kings of Judah and Israel and the prophets. We are looking at First Kings and reading through it, and we are at chapter 15. And just a quick overview. Chapter 15 of First Kings is covered in four chapters of Second Chronicles. That's chapter 13, 14, 15, and 16 of Second Chronicles. Why four chapters in one book and only one chapter in the book we're reading? Well, the chronicle writer has access to some prophetic narrative, some things that prophets knew about the kings and said to the kings, and more editorial comment from a prophetic point of view about the king. So you have four chapters in Second Chronicles covering the events that only one chapter in First King covers. So I will quickly review what those chronicle things are that are not included in First Kings. Let's read it. First Kings chapter 15, verse 1. First Kings 15:1. Now, in the 18th year of King Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, Abijam began to reign over Judah. He reigned for 3 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Absalom, and he walked in all the sins that his father did before him. That would be Rehoboam. And his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God. The word shalom. He was not shalom. He wasn't complete in his following the Lord, as the heart of David his father. Nevertheless, for David's sake, the Lord his God gave him a lamp in Jerusalem, setting up his son after him and establishing Jerusalem. Because David did what was right in the eyes of the Lord and did not turn aside from anything that he commanded him all the days of his life, except in the matter of Uriah the Hittite. Now there was war between Rehoboam and Jeroboam all the days of his life. The rest of the acts of Abijam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? And there was war between Abijam and Jeroboam, and Abijam slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David. And Asa, his son, reigned in his place. So we're introduced to the son of Rehoboam. Here's a quick little chart telling you about the kings of Judah in the south and Israel in the north. You got Rehoboam, the son of Solomon, is the first king. He reigns, I think, about 14 years. I don't remember off the top of my head. His son Abijam, or Abijah, we just read about, he only reigned about 3 years. And then Asa reigned a long period of time, about 41 years. Meanwhile, in the north, you had Jeroboam reigning longer than Rehoboam, I think about 22 years, doing evil in God's sight. But so did Rehoboam. And he was succeeded by his son Nadab, who was also evil, just like his father, just as Abijam was evil like his father Rehoboam. And just like Abijam in the south, Nadab in the north also had a very short reign, about 2 years. He was assassinated by this man, Baasha, who became king. He was a military leader in the north and became king when he assassinated Nadab. When he assassinated Nadab, he wiped out Jeroboam's family, and the dynasty of Jeroboam ended right there. Short reign. And Baasha basically was evil also most of his days, but he did fulfill the prophet's word by wiping out Jeroboam's family. So what's confusing is they'll say in the 10th year of Jeroboam, somebody in the south ruled, and then it'll go back and say in the 10th year of Asa, another king in the north ruled. So it goes back and forth comparing the reigns of different kings. So here's your first three kings of the south and of the north. And so Abijam, his name was Abijah. That's what it says in the Chronicles. Why the king says Abijam? Probably because Jah, Yahweh, short for Yahweh, and an evil king. The Jews were not very happy about allowing the evil king to have Yahweh's name in his name. So someone changed it to Yam, or it could have been Yam initially. Yam is the Canaanite god of the sea. So we don't really know what was happening with the two different versions of his name. Excuse me. Um, so what we have in Second Chronicles 13 is a lot more about Abijam. It talks about how he defeated Jeroboam. Uh, Abijam is the son of Rehoboam. Rehoboam's big rival was Jeroboam, who reigned longer and outlasted Rehoboam. So Rehoboam's son Abijam uh, takes on the north, probably trying to get those tribes back to regain those 10 tribes. And what we don't have in First Kings, we can find in Second Chronicles, is that Abijam actually gets up on the mountain and gives this pretty good speech to the northern tribes, saying, "Hey, don't fight us. You're on the wrong side. You have these golden calves. We don't. We have the temple. We have the priests. They're making offerings according to the law. Y'all are losers. We're not." It was really kind of a righteous speech. It was by the book, kind of painting by the color, saying the right things about the sins of the north. But Abijam himself was a pretty evil man. He didn't take away the idolatry his father introduced. So it's sort of one of those speeches like if you ever watched the old TV show Cheers, sometimes there'd be a guy sitting there with Norm, and he'd have a little bit too much beer and would start waxing philosophical, and sincere, and Norm would speak up and tell the bartender, "Okay, no more rounds for this idiot here." That's kind of what Abijam did. He went up there and made a fairly good speech by the book. Uh, it was truth telling to the northern tribes, saying the southern tribes still had the temple and proper worship, but in the end, Abijam was still not. He was still an idolater, and so we learn more about Abijam's defeat of the north. He defeated Jeroboam. Jeroboam had him trapped, according to Second Chronicles. He sent some troops around the rear of Abijam, so he had him kind of boxed in, and Abijam and the Judaites saw the trap, cried out to God, and God defeated Jeroboam, and there was quite a bit of bloodshed, and Jeroboam was tamed from that point on to the end of his reign. He was kind of boxed in, he was kind of held down. Judah took some of the northern cities of the boundary. Excuse me, mouth is dry for some reason. So, how is it that God even allows a man like Abijam to reign and have this victory? And he called out to God. I mean, God's grace, his favor upon David, Abijam's grandfather. Because of that, God allowed a lamp to stay in Jerusalem, allowed the dynasty of David to continue. The stability of the south, Judah, was unbelievable compared to the north. In the south, we have one dynasty. In the north, we have 9 dynasties in total. Number of kings, 9 dynasties. People kept getting killed and replaced. Whereas for 400 years in Judah, they had one dynasty. So let's read about Abijah's son, Asa. Verse 9. In the 20th year of Jeroboam, king of Israel, in the north, Asa, in the south, began to reign over Judah. And he reigned 41 years in Jerusalem. Long reign. His mother's name was Maacah, the daughter of Absalom. And Asa did what was right in the eyes of the Lord, as David his father had done. He put away the male cult prostitutes out of the land and removed all the idols that his fathers had made, means both Rehoboam and Abijah. He also removed Maacah, his mother, from being queen mother because she had made an abominable image for Asherah. And Asa cut down her image and burned it at the brook Kidron. But the high places were not taken away. This is one downfall. Nevertheless, the heart of Asa was wholly shalom, true to the Lord all of his days. And he brought into the house of the Lord the sacred gifts of his father and of his own sacred gifts, silver, gold, and vessels. So we learn about a man named Asa. He's the first great reforming king of Judah. He's not as great as Josiah or Hezekiah. He probably ranks number 3 in terms of commendation from the prophetic witness. He's pretty righteous. He's pretty determined, for some reason, to undo the idolatry of his father and his grandfather. It lists him as having the same mother and grandfather as his father, but in the Hebrew, when you said mother, it often referred to grandmother. Could refer to the father, could refer to the grandfather or father. It's kind of a lineage. So in Second Chronicles, we get the rest of the story. We learn more. We learn about a battle that First King doesn't cover. The battle with a Cushite or an Ethiopian. Not totally sure if he's Arabian or if he's Ethiopian. Named Zerah, who comes and invades with a mass army, invades Judah in the south. Of course, it would hit them first before they got to the north, and so they are able to defeat this great army when they cry out to God. Asa cries out to God, and God causes there to be a tremendous victory. God routs the armies of these southern armies that come to try to subjugate Judah, and so they won this great battle. That's part of the sacred gifts. The kings, his father Abijah, he took his father's loot and things that were left over from their battles, and Asa took his loot from this recent battle, and they dedicated it to the temple, as they should have. Also, we learn in Second Chronicles something about Asa that's not found in First Kings. Is that there was a great revival that happened near the beginning of his reign. A prophet named Azariah confronted King Asa and told him, if you'll stay faithful, God will supply, God will defeat your enemies. If you'll be like like the Lord's King David. And so the result of that was a revival. They had this great covenant meeting, and these sacrifices to the Lord were numerous. These covenants were made to keep the commands and the law. Oaths were made. People made covenants. It resulted, the Chronicle writer says, that's what resulted in the removal of the king's mother. She could no longer be queen mother. She had no longer had that royal position because she introduced an image that was horrid. The actual Hebrew word is only used in these verses, verse 13 of 1 Kings 15. It's not found anywhere else, and the root of that word means to shake, like in horror, shaking from horror. So she made something that was not just idolatrous, but for some reason was horrific. And so he removed that, he cut it down, he burned it in the valley of Kidron. And so we kind of see New Testament principle there, right? Jesus said, unless you hate your mother and father and sister and brother and wife, you cannot follow me. You cannot be my follower. So even our family must take second behind Jesus. What does that say about other loyalties we have? To country, even, to our state, to our party, these things we need to be good at and be involved in, but they can't be our hope. Our hope must be in the Lord. And so now we learn what happens next. Let's see here. Verse 16. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel. So king of Judah, Asa, and then the king of Israel, Baasha. We're not introduced to Baasha yet. He's just spoken of here. We will be introduced to how he got to be king later, because he's covering Judahite, the southern kingdom, first. Then he'll go to the northern kingdom. So he has to delay talking about a king that's at war with the south. Verse 16. And there was war between Asa and Baasha, king of Israel, all their days. So all the time that Asa was reigning and Baasha was reigning, they had war. Baasha, king of Israel, went up against Judah and built Ramah, that he might permit no one to go out or come in to Asa, king of Judah. Then Asa took all the silver and gold that were left in the treasures of the house of the Lord and the treasures of the king's house, and gave them into the hands of his servants. And King Asa sent them to Benhadad, son of Taberman, the son of Hezion, the king of Syria, who lived in Damascus, saying, "Let there be a covenant between me and you, as there was between my father and your father. Behold, I am sending you a present of silver and gold. Go break your covenant with Baasha, king of Israel, that he may withdraw from me." And Ben-Hadad listened to King Asa and sent commanders of his army against the cities of Israel and conquered Ijon, Dan, Abel, Beth, Makkah, and the Chinnereth. All Chinnereth. These are all northern cities because Syria is north of Israel. With all the land of Naphtali, the tribe of Naphtali was occupied. And when Baasha, the king of Israel, heard about this, he stopped building in Ramah and he went back. He lived in Tirzah, the capital. Then King Asa made a proclamation to all Judah, none was exempt, that they would carry away the stones of Ramah and its timber with which Baasha had been building, and with them King Asa built up Geba of Benjamin and Mizpah. Now the rest of all the acts of Asa and all his might and all that he did and the cities that he built, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the kings of Judah? But in his old age he was diseased in his feet. And Asa slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David, his father, that would be his great grandfather actually, and Jehoshaphat's son reigned in his place. Jehoshaphat, his son, reigned in this place. So we have this war between the north and south. Here again is the kings. So now we have Asa reigning about the same time, overlapping, a great deal. These two kings in the south and the north. They have the temple. They don't. They have the golden calves. They've already left the faith, largely gone toward Baal worship because of these golden calves. So these two fought border skirmishes for all their reigns, and Baasha decided to make a move against Asa. He went as far south as he could be, 5 miles from Jerusalem, and he seized Ramah, kind of a border, kind of a no man's land. He took this city, began to build it up greatly, and began to use it to blockade, to stop people from going to Jerusalem to worship in the temple where Asa's king, and going and doing trade with Judah. And so, what does Asa do? Well, previously, what we hear from the Chronicles is Asa faced down the armies from the south, the Cushites, and by crying out to God, and God gave a great rout and victory. But in this case, he decided not to do that. He went to the temple, took treasures from the king's store, his own store, and here Asa took these treasures and bought off another king, let's say Syria over here, Ben-Hadad, because Ben-Hadad had an alliance with Baasha, and so Asa wanted Ben-Hadad over here to break that alliance with Baasha and support him. So it'd be 2 against 1. Asa's father, Abijah, had a covenant for a while with the king of Syria, and it had been broken off, and the northern kingdom apparently had bought him out and paid more to the king of Syria, and had an alliance, had protection. So Asa's strategy seems to work. It has an effect. Asa buys off the ally of Baasha, and that ally Baasha attacks Baasha and supports Asa, and so therefore Baasha backs off from building up Ramah, which is kind of like Cuba and the Cuba arms race, putting nuclear warheads right in our backyard. So Ramah was right in the backyard, right 5 miles from Jerusalem. Very dangerous, volatile situation of him building that up tremendously to do a blockade against the south. Archaeology has confirmed, number one, has confirmed this genealogy. The Bible throws in this genealogy of Syria king, and who cares about Syria? But he gives 3 generations of the Assyrian king, and there's an inscribed monument that's been discovered to Ben-Hadad in honor of a god. The word Hadad, that's the storm god of the Syrians. So he's a son, he's considered a son of a god. This king was king of Syria. He was a small nation, kind of like Israel and Judah. And so they had shifting alliances. And So, what we don't see in Kings is that Asa is condemned for making this alliance. A prophet named Hanani comes to him and condemns him. He says, "Don't you know God delivered you from these southern tribes previously, and you cried out, and He saved you? But now, when you're threatened by the king of Israel, you go and you buy off this alliance. It's going to give you long-term problems. It's disobedience. It's not showing faith in God." And there's a great 2 or 3 verses in there from Hanani. This would be probably chapter 15 of 2 Chronicles 15, where the eyes of the Lord roam to and fro across the earth to support those who strongly trust Him and love Him. Just some great words there by the prophet Hanani condemning Asa. So Asa's a righteous king generally. He overlooked some high places, probably some private shrines. In the cities, he tore them down, the Chronicle says, but in the countryside, it's harder to do. People had more privacy, sneak around, have these shrines to different gods. He fell there. He also fell by going and giving all these treasures to the king of Syria to get an alliance rather than trusting God to defeat Baasha, the king of Israel. It's kind of strange, isn't it? Jews fighting each other. The Jews in the south, Judah, the kingdom of Israel in the north, those 10 tribes versus 2 tribes. It's just strange hearing about Jews at war with each other when they are all God's people, technically, to this point. Only Judah will survive, though. So, the end of Asa's reign, the Chronicles is a little bit more in depth and says there's some more failures. He actually hears this prophet Hananiah give this condemnation, and he puts him in jail. And he does some other unjust things, the Chronicle says, just briefly, and then it says that he didn't trust God when he became diseased in his feet, but he went after these physicians, not like our physicians today, probably more magical, and he trusted them rather than trusting in God. So he kind of ended his 41-year reign on a sour note, not exactly obedient to God, putting the prophet who condemned him in jail. I guess after 41 years, he felt his power. He kind of got a big head, perhaps. His son Jehoshaphat will take his place. Jehoshaphat has some good things about him, and probably Jehoshaphat, scholars think that he was a co-regent with Asa for the last 3 years of Asa's reign, because Asa was disabled for some kind of disease. And by the way, archaeology also has discovered that in Mizpah, this little city, one of the 2 cities that, Asa faced down the king of Israel, who was building like putting nuclear missiles in Cuba. He was putting up a fortress there in Ramah, and Asa was able to get that removed, and the king of Israel escaped, left Ramah, and so the king of the south in Judah, Asa, commanded all his people to walk there to Ramah, 5 miles from Jerusalem, and carry the stones, wheel them back on carts, all the lumber, everything. And archaeologists have been able to find quite a bit of a massive buildup in Mizpah from that same period. They built up their own southern cities on the border instead, giving them protection against the northern kingdom and others. Now the writer of Kings turns to the northern tribes. We've been talking this chapter so far about the southern tribes, the reign of David's dynasty. Now Nadab, the son of Jeroboam. Verse 25. Nadab, the son of Jeroboam, began to reign over Israel in the north in the 2nd year of Asa, king of Judah, and he reigned over Israel 2 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord and walked in the way of his father, Jeroboam, and in his sin which he made Israel to sin. Baasha, now we're getting the story of how Baasha, who we've already encountered, now we get the story of how he came to power, because now the author is returning to the history of the northern tribes. Verse 27, Baasha, the son of Ahijah of the house of Issachar, conspired against him, and Baasha struck down struck down the king, um, King Nadab, at Gibeathon, which belonged to the Philistines. For Nadab and all Israel were laying siege to Gibeathon. So Baasha killed him in the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, and reigned in his place in the north. And as soon as he was king, he killed all the house of Jeroboam. He left the house of Jeroboam, not one that breathed, until he had destroyed it, according to the word of the Lord that he spoke by his servant Ahijah the Shilonite. For it was for the sins of Jeroboam that he sinned, and that he made Israel sin, and because of the anger to which he provoked the Lord, the God of Israel. So we learned that Jeroboam ends his long reign. He's evil. His son Nadab takes over. He's evil. He only reigns a couple years, and he's assassinated by probably a general. We don't know. Baasha was from the tribe of Issachar, which is a very unfamous tribe, probably the least of the tribes in many ways. Very backwards. Only one judge came from Issachar, and he wasn't very impressive at all. So Baasha was probably general for King Nadab, and he turned on him and assassinated him while they were besieging a Philistine city, which they were supposed to be doing, clearing them out. Baasha, the military leader, turns on the king, King Nadab, son of Jeroboam, and kills him. So Nadab only has a couple of years. He's evil anyway, and Baasha is evil also, but at least he fulfilled what the prophet had said, that Jeroboam's line would be cut off. So we have a new dynasty. Jeroboam's dynasty lasted 2 years after him. And so now we have Baasha as the king of the north of Israel, the 10 tribes. And he wipes out Jeroboam's line. And he's evil, and he provokes the Lord to jealousy, but he is a pretty aggressive king and has a long reign. So again, one more look at the kings. You have Solomon's son Rehoboam, quite a few years. His son Adijah, who was wicked and only he had one righteous thing. That speech he gave to the northern tribes seemed righteous, but overall the Bible gives him an F on spiritual things. And then his son Asa, for some mysterious reason, was righteous for the most part, but he ended his reign with some unrighteous things and lack of faith. Overall gets a good grade though. In the north, meanwhile, you have Jeroboam has a longer reign than Rehoboam. His son Nadab takes over, only lives 2 years, and is assassinated by Baasha, and we start a new dynasty. We're going to have 9 dynasties in the north. All the assassinations and things going on. What's confusing too is that, not only is he shifting from the north to the south to give this history, he also has some names that are very much the same. In verse 27, Baasha's father is Ahijah, which is the same name for the prophet Ahijah, who had confronted Jeroboam, and had first told him he'd be king. And so that can be a little confusing too, the names. Now finally, verse 31, now the rest of the acts of Nadab and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel? And there was war between Asa and Baasha, the king of Israel, all their days. In the 3rd year of Asa, king of Judah, Baasha, the son of Ahijah, began to reign over all Israel at Tirzah, the capital. And he reigned 24 years. He did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and walked in the way of Jeroboam, that's his grandfather, and his sin, which he made Israel to sin. So that was a pretty fast little look at chapter 15. I think what was interesting to me is, from a gospel standpoint, Asa's willing to demote his mom for the sake of righteousness, to get rid of idolatry. We have to be able to love the Lord, be loyal to his kingdom first, with so many competing things. Even good things. Good things are sometimes the enemy of the best. That's what Jesus told Martha. Martha, Martha, you're concerned about many things, but only one thing is really needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken from her. It's not that Martha wasn't concerned with good things. Serving the Lord, hospitality, those are good spiritual gifts, but if they become the focus and the idol, anything can be an idol. Grandkids can be an idol. Your country can be your idol. If you mix the flag with the cross too much, and conflate Americanism with Christianity, for one thing, you hurt the gospel because foreign nations look at America as a Christian nation primarily, and when they see our immorality, they can't understand why Christianity is so immoral. But we need our loyalty needs to be Christ first. Be patriotic, otherwise you're not thankful. Fight like crazy your battles for the culture, for what's right, for righteousness. Use politics. Use all the means that are there. Don't do it unrighteously though. The ends don't justify the means, and don't have your hopes in political solution. Uh, that's what the mistake Asa made. A political solution. Solomon said, when we're in trouble, at his prayer of dedication to the temple, he said, when we're in trouble, we'll look to you, Lord, and you'll save us. Well, Asa looked to the temple, just glanced at it, and realized it has some treasures. And so he didn't really look to the Lord and use those treasures to buy off an ally to get out of a sticky situation. We should use means. We should be involved in politics. We should make alliances with co-belligerents like Catholics and others on moral issues. But be careful that our hopes aren't there, and be careful we don't use unrighteous means, and be careful that we don't express a lack of faith in God ultimately. Our faith can't be in our party or a vision for our country. It has to be in the Lord, who is in control, who will use all things. And I think those are good gospel lessons for us today. Asa should have known to trust the Lord as he had trusted him earlier. We can't let our hopes flip on us. We've got to not panic. We've got to keep our faith and confidence in God and his promises. And the gospel must be first. So everything we do must be to support the gospel. It can't go against the gospel. We can't be liars and lacking truthfulness in our dealings with people because we bear the gospel. So some good gospel lessons in this crazy chapter 15 with so much going on. Hope you read over it. Hope you'll get a little bit of, if you have time, read over from 2 Chronicles 13 through 16. That's another perspective and much more detail. Father, thank you for this lesson. We take these lessons about the kings and their mistakes and their insecurities and their hopes being flipped the wrong way and away from you, and how you are provoked because you're a jealous God, because you are loyal to your covenant and you love your people. Help us, God, to be faithful to you, be loyal to you, to your kingdom, to your gospel, above all things, and even hating mother and father, brother and sister and wife and husband in comparison to our loyalty and love to you. Make that true in us, Father, each day. In Christ's name, amen. All right, thank you so much for being a part of the lesson. Chapter 16 of 1 Kings next Sunday.